One of the men slaughtered 9 camels at 3 times, 3 each time at different stages of the mission. Abu Ubaidah, the leader of the campaign, prohibited him from doing so. The sea was generous, and presented them with an animal called al-anbar, sperm whale, so rich in fat that they subsisted on it for half a month. When they came back home, they narrated the story to the Prophet, PBUH, who commented that it was provision granted by Allah, and asked them to share him some of its meat. Sahih al-Bukhari 2,625,626, Sahih Muslim 2,145,146. This campaign came chronologically prior to Al-Hudaybiyah Treaty because of and after which the Muslims stopped intercepting Qurayshi caravans. Bani al-Mustalik, Muraisi, Ghazwa, Shaban 6 Hijri. Though militarily it did not assume its full dimension, this Ghazwa had certain implications that brought about a state of turbulence within the Islamic State, and resulted in disgracefulness to clothe in the hypocrites. Moreover, it entailed enactment of consolidating legislations that attached an impression of nobility, dignity and purity of souls to the Islamic community. News reached the Prophet, PBUH, on Shaban 2nd. To the effect that the chief of Bani al-Mustalik, al-Harith bin Durar had mobilized his men, along with some Arabs, to attack Medina. Buraidah bin al-Hasib al-Islami was immediately dispatched to verify the reports. He had some words with Abi Durar, who confirmed his intention of war. He later sent a reconnoiterer to explore the positions of the Muslims, but he was captured and killed. The Prophet, PBUH, summoned his men and ordered them to prepare for war. Before leaving, Zayd bin Haritha was mandated to see to the affairs of Medina and dispose them. On hearing the advent of the Muslims, the disbelievers got frightened and the Arabs going with them defected and ran away to their lives. Abu Bakr was entrusted with the banner of the emigrants, and that of the helpers went to Sa'd bin Ubadah. The two armies were stationed at a well called Muraisi. Arrow shooting went on for an hour, and then the Muslims rushed and engaged with the enemy in a battle that ended in full victory for the Muslims. Some men were killed, women and children of the disbelievers taken as captives, and a lot of booty fell to the lot of the Muslims. Only one Muslim was killed by mistake by a helper. Amongst the captives was Juwairiyah, daughter of al-Harith, chief of the disbelievers. The Prophet, PBUH, married her and, in compensation, the Muslims had to manumit 100 others of the enemy prisoners who embraced Islam, and were then called the Prophet's in-laws. Zad al-Mad 2,112,113, Ibn Hisham 2,289,290,294,295. The treacherous role of the hypocrites prior to the Bani al-Mustalik Ghazwa. Abdullah bin Ubay, a terrible hypocrite, was full of rancor against Islam and the Muslims because he believed that the Prophet, PBUH, had dispossessed him of his leadership over al-Aws and al-Khazraj, two clans already agreed on the prophethood of Muhammad, PBUH, and his masterhood over them. Abdullah's rancor had appeared before he feigned Islam. Following the Battle of Badr, he made pretensions of being a Muslim, but deep at heart, he remained that terrible enemy of Allah, His Messenger, and all the believers, in general. His sole target had always been to sow the seeds of dissension in the Muslim community, and undermine the cause of the new heavenly religion it has. His treacherous behavior could be witnessed everywhere but was strikingly evident in his wicked attempts at creating a state of confusion and disorder amongst the Muslims at Uhud battle. His hypocrisy and deceit assumed serious and ugly dimensions when he used to stand up among the Muslims shortly before the Prophet's Friday speech, and mockingly say to them, "This is the Messenger of Allah, who has honored you with Allah, so you have got to support, obey and listen to him," and then he would sit down. He did the same following Uhud battle on Friday. He was so rude and presumptuous that his words smacked unmistakingly of deeply rooted rancor, so that some of the Muslims took him by his cloak reproachingly and silenced him. He immediately left, uttering rude and mocking words. A helper met him at the mosque gate and ordered him to return and beg the messenger for Allah's forgiveness, but he retorted that he had never wanted him to ask for that. Ibn Hisham 2:105. He, moreover, conducted clandestine contacts with Bani Nadir, another tribe of Jews, encouraging them to make alliance with him and promising support for them, all of this in his ceaseless efforts in a long process of conspiracy and intrigue hatched against the Muslims. Allah's words as regards his treacherous acts and awe-inspiring attempts during the trench battle came to testify quite clearly to this mode of hypocrisy, and when the hypocrites and those in whose hearts is a disease of doubts, said, Allah and His Messenger, PBUH, promised us nothing but delusions. Al-Quran 33:12. The verses go on in the same context to describe the hypocrite as a coward and a defeatist. He is a liar and has no regard for pledges solemnly made. He is treacherous, disloyal and perfidious. He is niggardly and greedy. In short, he is the complete antithesis of a true believer. They think that Al-Ahzab, the Confederates, have not yet withdrawn, and if Al-Ahzab, the Confederates, should come again, they would wish they were in the deserts, wandering among the Bedouins, seeking news about you, from a far place, and if they happen to be among you, they would not fight but little. Al-Quran 33:20. All enemies of Islam from the Jews, hypocrites and polytheists did acknowledge that Islam had the upper hand not because of material superiority, multitudes of troops or much equipment, but it was rather due to the noble values, refined ethics and high attributes that imbued the Muslim community and whoever was attached to it. The enemies of Islam were already aware of that flood of light derived wholly from the person of the Prophet, PBUH, who always stood as an excellent exemplar for men to copy and follow. The enemies of Islam, after steering the course of feudal warfare against the new religion for 5 years, came to realize fully that exterminating Islam is not accessible in the battlefields, so they resorted to other tactics. They, being reputed gossip mongers, decided to launch a widespread propaganda campaign aiming at slandering the person of the Prophet, PBUH, in a most sensitive area of the Arabian life, namely ethics and traditions. Following the Battle of the Confederates, the Prophet, PBUH, married Zainab bint Jahsh after her marriage with Zayd bin Haritha, his adopted son, had broken up. They seized this opportunity and began to circulate idle talk against the Prophet, PBUH, in Arabia, depending on a tradition among the desert Arabs that prohibits contracting a marriage with an adopted son's divorcee. They alleged Thothi's marriage would be considered a heinous sin. They also based their malicious propaganda on the fact that Zainab was his fifth wife, whereas the number was strictly limited to a maximum of 4 in the Noble Quran, hence the validity of this marriage was in doubt. According to them, these rumors and gossips had a negative impact on the morale of some weak-hearted Muslims until the decisive verses were revealed acquitting the Prophet, PBUH, and invalidating all those ill designs and obnoxious schemes. O Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, keep your duty to Allah, and obey not the disbelievers and the hypocrites. I do not follow their advices. Verily, Allah is ever all-knower, all-wise. Al-Quran 33:1. The wicked role they played in the course of the Ghazwa of Bani al-Mustalik. During this Ghazwa, the hypocrites almost managed to create a sort of discord among the Muslims themselves, coupled with a serious and ugly slander against the Prophet, PBUH, himself. In short, their behavior was an authentic translation of Allah's words, "Had they marched out with you, they would have added to you nothing except disorder, and they would have hurried about in your midst, spreading corruption, and sowing sedition among you." Al-Quran 9:47. A quarrel was about to break out between the emigrants and the helpers on account of plots and evil intentions designed by the hypocrites. The Prophet, PBUH, told them off, describing their misbehavior as something smacking of pre-Islamic practices. They, hypocrites with Abdullah bin Ubay at their head, were furious for the challenge which the Muslims showed towards the hostile plans and vicious intrigues woven behind closed doors, and swore the most honorable will expel the meanest out of Medina, and added, "They, the Muslims, have outnumbered and shared us our land. If you fatten your dog, it will eat you. When that talk was reported to the Prophet, PBUH, Umar, a venerable companion, asked for permission to have Ibn Ubay killed. The Prophet, PBUH, naturally turned down his proposal on the grounds that it did not become of a prophet, PBUH, to be accused of killing his people. He, on the contrary, in an unexpected move, asked Umar to announce departure. He marched with his men for 2 days until the sun grew too hot. They stopped and fell asleep, a clever attempt at diverting his people's attention from the previous event. Abdullah's son heard of that vial of his father, and as the party reached Medina, he drew his sword and barred his father's entry into the town until he had confessed and declared that he himself was the meanest of the citizens of Medina and the Prophet, PBUH, the most honorable of them. Thus the boast recoiled on his head. It was also reported that the son was ready to kill his father if the Prophet, PBUH, had wanted him to.